Well, the top line information about whether there were going to be criminal charges against the president, there's nothing really surprising there. There are not going to be charges that are brought against the president or his family members because of this. We knew that a few weeks ago. What I think's new about what we learned today was just a little bit of the color, and that's what this was all about. It was about trying to understand Trump's personality, his competence, what are his instincts as a president. And we learned a lot. We learned, for instance, that the day he learned that a special counsel had been assigned to investigate interference in the 2016 election by Russia, President Trump swore. He slumped in his chair, as the notes of the Attorney General said, and used a swear word to say, we're basically screwed. My presidency's over. We also learned a lot more about what I think people have known for quite some time, which is the incompetence of many people working in the presidential transition and on into the White House. They were sort of amateurish in the way they went about governance and connections and contacts with other countries, everyone down from the president's communications aides to his son-in-law, who had to send an email to someone who was running a think tank to ask what the name of the Russian ambassador was. These are people who are entrusted with great national security roles, and yet they seem to be just sort of experimenting their way through governance.
So this redacted version confirms that there was no Russian collusion. So the focus then was on the question of obstruction of justice. What does the report tell us in terms of the president's behavior as it pertains to obstruction?
Well, it seems like he went right up to the point of where something would have been textbook obstruction, but maybe, and this seems to be something that we see about Trump in a fuller picture, is that he's very good about being 1 degree away from criminality. He knows better to have someone else go and do something on your behalf, but then not check in with them to see how it went, as opposed to doing it yourself. And he's obsessed with loyalty. For instance, he's asking the Attorney General of the United States, how did you let this investigation happen? Weren't you supposed to stop this? There's also corroboration in this report that the president had asked the former FBI director for a pledge of loyalty. Trump seems to assume, and this report really bears out people's suspicions, that American public servants are not there to represent the country. They're there to help out President Trump, and that was no clearer today than when the Attorney General of the U.S. came out and sort of spun the Mueller report before giving it over to the public to make of it what they wanted.
Speak to the process of how this report has been released. We first had the letter from William Barr on March 24th. We had his press conference prior to the release of the redacted version. Where do we go from here?
I think it's understandable there was a gap between the sort of summary of the report and the release of a full report. The redactions that are necessary in accordance with U.S. law and criminal proceeding are intense, and it takes a long time to go through something as dense as this report and make sure no sources are being compromised, no methods of listening to Russian government conversations are being divulged to the public that might compromise U.S. national security. That was, I think, to be expected. What I think was more shocking to people was the fact that the Attorney General came out 2 hours before the report was released today and really seemed to be speaking not to the public and not informing the public about this report, but sort of giving some sound bites to the White House. He had a lot of little sound bites, no obstruction, no collusion, tiny little quotes that you can imagine were aired on the news for at least 2 hours before the report and will probably be used for a long time going forward to try and sum up this report in a very concise way that helps out the White House.
So this is no longer a criminal matter. It now becomes a political matter.
Yeah.
What are Democrats in Congress? They now have the gavels on committees. They are in charge of the House of Representatives. Where do we go from here?
And I would point out, it's not just Democrats that ought to be looking at this report carefully. Republicans, too. There are a lot of Republicans who, since the beginning of this administration, have expressed misgivings about the way Trump is going about his time in office. They ought to be going through this report, too, and looking for things to help them make a political calculation about, is Trump the kind of president we want? Even if he didn't commit a crime, there are cases that you could make for why impeachment might be a good idea for a president that is merely incompetent or compromised or inclined to associate with the wrong people. And I think President Trump has done a great job, a masterful job perhaps, at baking in impressions of this report before it was released. You know, by going on conservative media for weeks before the report came out and saying no obstruction, no collusion, I'm exonerated, he's actually made it very difficult for Republicans who might want to critique the president's behavior and go through this report carefully and diagnose problems with the president's behavior. It's going to be difficult for them to go to their constituencies and say, we should keep investigating the president because their voters are going to be whipped up into a fury created by President Trump's rhetoric. So he's sort of changed the narrative to protect himself in advance.
So in a nutshell, we're not at the end of this.
I don't think we're at the end of it, though I will say the big thing that's changed in the past few months is that we are now in the U.S. starting to look towards the 2020 election. You have a large field of Democrats who are starting to craft narratives about how they want to defeat Trump. And I think what we're seeing is we are shifting into a period where Democrats are starting to realize that new ideas are really catching fire. Some candidates have emerged in just the last few weeks who are not focusing on criticizing Trump or shaming his voters, but about showing voters, hey, President Trump said he was going to fix the American heartland or bring back industrialization. These new Democrats are going to those communities and telling them, hey, Trump failed you on this specific thing. It's not about whether he's a criminal or not. It's whether he is effective as a president. And so I think Democrats, they should continue oversight. They should investigate things that come out of this report that are really glaring and that might generate new information. But I think they would be unwise to dwell too much in the past. Their ideas are catching fire. They should go in that direction.
Luke Vargas, thank you very much indeed. Luke Vargas, a political analyst, talking about the now redacted version of the Mueller report released to Congress and, by virtue of that, the public.